Now, for the last time, I'm sad to say, I want to introduce Poet in Residence, Ian McMillan.
Thank you very much. Yes, I was just thinking about how I became involved with the Academy of Urbanism, and I remember exactly what happened. John Thompson rang me up on a Sunday afternoon. I was just mixing the Yorkshire puddings. I was wearing an academician type pin that said, "I've been to Rill." That somebody got me from Rill, obviously. And John rang up, but didn't introduce himself. I went, "Hello, it's John." I didn't know what John he meant. He sounded like my brother, who is also called John. I thought it was my brother John. He went, "Hello, it's John." I said, "Hello, John, how are you?" "I'm fine." I'd only seen my brother John the day before. My brother John, who I thought was John, but wasn't, was John Thompson, said, "How have you been?" I said, "Well, we saw each other yesterday." He said, "No, we didn't." He still didn't tell me who he was. He then said, "I'm reading about the Mark Ratcliffe show on Radio 1. And I realised that the producer of the Mark Ratcliffe show was also called John. I thought that was the John he thought he was. So I said, "Hello, is that John?" He said, "Yeah." He said, I said, "You won't be on next week?" He said, "No, I'm talking about when you were on last week." I said, "Right." And then I said the words that I should have said at the start of the conversation. I said, "Who are you?" And he went, "John Thompson." I didn't know who that was. I said, "Good, hello John, how are you?" He said, "Look, I heard you on the Mark Ratcliffe show." Now, years ago, I used to be a poet in residence on the Mark Ratcliffe show. And this is the days before the internet. And you'd read some poems out, and then you'd set a task for the listeners. But rather than emailing them in, or even faxing them in, they have to post them in what we call the bulging sack. And the bulging sack was full of poems. John Thompson had heard me on the Mark Ratcliffe show, and somehow got my number and rang me up and said, "I'd like to be the Academy of Urbanism's Poet in Residence." And because I'm freelance, like all freelancers always do, I went, "Yes, I will be the Academy of Urbanism's Poet in Residence." Because at that time, Poets in Residence were kind of in the air. So since the late 90s, I'd been Poet in Residence at the mighty Barnsley FC, so I've been part of their long decline. And in 2003, I was Poet in Residence at Humberside Police. They called me their beat poet, a gag that not many people got. And I remember I was meant to be running a writing workshop with some coppers, and they went, "Well, they had the new chief constable," and he said, "Well, not only has he done this, this and this, he's got a poet and all." I was like the last. So I said to John, "What do you want me to do?" And he said, "When we have the awards, I'd like you to write a poem for each of the categories. So there'll be 5 categories. Could you write me a poem for each one?" And I said, "Yes, I could." And it was an amazing thing, I can tell you, for 20 years, or for however long I've been doing it, to write these poems was an astonishing thing, because at the start of every summer, I get this list of places and streets and neighbourhoods and towns and cities and European cities, and some I'd been to and some I hadn't, and I had to write a poem about each one for the looming deadline of November when the awards were. And so I treated it as a kind of a joyous thing. It's great to be commissioned, but to sit there, I used to say to my wife, "I'm just off to write my urbanism poems. Don't disturb me, I'm going to work." And so I started writing these poems, and they became a fixture in my mental map. I thought, "Oh, it's almost time to write the urbanism poems." And what an absolute joy it has been, a real joy. I found we got one from 2006. Seems so long ago. I know you weren't born. Such a long time ago. Now this was before I started writing proper sonnets. I turned to sonnets a bit later. The sonnet is a great thing. As you know, it's a 14-line poem that can rhyme A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G, and always it's got to have 14 syllables in each line. And that means that even people who don't write poems can have a go at writing sonnets, because it's a mechanical thing in a way. Some of you might remember that attempt we had at Reba to write a group sonnet with the audience that had one too many. And they were shouting out deliberately things that didn't rhyme. Put the word orange in it. Put the word silver at the end of a line. Put the word purple. That didn't quite work, I've got to tell you, but we had a lot of fun. So, this is a poem I wrote about Edinburgh. Edinburgh was the first European city in 2006. And it taught me quite a lot about how to squeeze all those ideas into a little space which is part of the fun, the endless fun of writing these things. This is a city where history, layers on history, and stone layers on stone, and walking breeds walking down a narrow close into a vista that makes you gasp as vista piles on vista, and the trains pull into Waverley, and vista piles on history, piles on stone, piles on stories, piles on legends, piles on Old Town, piles on New Town, on a city built on history and ready for tomorrow. And it was interesting to use that kind of repetition beat. And I thought, well, still it's not quite enough. You know, it wasn't a proper rhymey sonnet that started to work. So this is a later one, from last year in fact, Strand Aldwych, which won the Great Street. And all the way through I kept thinking, I wish it was called Aldwych Strand, because there'd be so much better opportunities for the rhyme to be there. But you have to deal with, as you know, what you've got, with the world as it is, not as you'd like it to be. So, this is one. My granddaughter Isla, I always mention her, she said, she calls them summits. Are you going to be writing your summits? I thought that's not a bad word for it, because you're kind of ascending the summit of verse. I said, yes, I'm off to write me summits. So this is a summit about Strand Aldwych. And I realised after a bit that because a lot of them are about regeneration, certain things kept reoccurring, like there'd be a lot of espressos being drunk, there'd be a lot of gleaming buildings, there'd be a lot of people who looked like the ones on architects' drawings, wandering up and down. So, this is the one we did for Strand Aldwych. Urban tapestry with a golden stitch, a living space where everyone just meets everyone else. Just two words, Strand Aldwych, speaking volumes of how you take the streets and give them back to those who need them most. The walkers, the talkers, shakers of hands. Life's a ceremony, streets are the host, and a place like Strand Aldwych understands change is possible and really vital if a city space is to breathe and thrive. And yes, Strand Aldwych deserves the title of place where it's splendid to be alive. Had lots of rhymes in the palm of me hand, if only they'd called it Aldwych Strand. Because you'll have a gap at the end, you'll have a gap at the end. So then, I thought, you know, it's time for me to step away from doing this, because it's time to give the young people a try. You know, honestly, I'm 70 next year, I don't feel old, but I've been doing this a long time, and I think there's so many young poets around, there are so many young, fabulous poets who can take on doing this. And it's not as though we'll not see each other again, we'll bump into each other down the road, but I think it's time to hand on most definitely, because goodness knows we need poets in these terrible times. Goodness knows we need placemakers in these terrible times. So I kind of broke the rules a bit and wrote a double sonnet, which is like two sonnets, one after the other, with a special bonus 2 lines at the end. I thought, yeah, I don't know how I managed to do it. So it's called Meetings. I thought, what is this about? And in the end, it's about meetings. It's about meetings of words and images. It's about a meeting of poets and architects, and poets and thinkers, and poets and placemakers. And it's a thing that'll never end. It'll just get better and better. And when these young people carry on doing it, it'll be so fantastic. It really will. And so it's called Meeting. One last sonnet, make it a double, which I kind of thought was a really funny gag, but obviously not. So it goes like this. The way that all those places met those words, the way that all those spaces met those lines, the way phrases flew through the towns like birds, the way joins combined with rhythms, rhymes, and the turning world is a raging storm. But what once was true is still no less true. Wide streets are triumphs of content and form. A city is a place where I see you and we get along. We agree to meet. Although we're strangers here, let's meet the fact that, like poems and places, sides of a street can come together, shake hands, interact. Placemaking's about the sum of the parts, greater than crowds of solo minds and hearts. The way that language meets, unfolding air, in all these rooms where the ideas flow, turning an unloved here into a there that people will love, where they'll want to go and where they'll want to live the kinds of lives that everyone, everywhere, always needs. Lives where community grows and thrives, and where all the fine words turn into deeds. Fine words again. That's where all this began for me. just how to make a poem fit, the glory when something jumps off the plan and people nod and say, yes, this is it. Poets meet urbanists, where craft meets art. The task's not complete, but we've made a start. Allow me 2 more lines. I say to you, all hail the unstoppable AoU. Aye, aye.